for the Success and Money Foundation.org. We're a nonprofit educational foundation or charity. We're an NGO. We teach kids, teens, young adults, and adults about success and money principles because most likely you didn't learn it in school. Now, our goal is to be able to teach you the simplicity of money and how money works and how to be more successful. Now, be in mind that we're not giving you financial advice, okay? We're just teaching you some of the strategies that you could find on your own, but the goal is to be able to make this fun and competitive where you can learn about money because we want to impact your life as well as the life of others. So anytime you invest, make sure that you check with your financial advisor or your accountant to make sure that you understand what we're doing. But one of the questions that came up is, what is an index and how does it work? Well, so really what I want you to understand is that there are thousands and thousands of publicly traded companies that are out there. And you can own a little bit of those companies by investing in that stock. So there are thousands and thousands and thousands of companies that are publicly traded. Now, when you invest and you pick and choose yourself, you say, I want some of this one, I want some of that one, I want some of this one, I want some of that one. And you pick and choose. That's number one, picking and choosing. Number two is what we call a mutual fund. Number two is a mutual fund. And you're hiring somebody to do that for you. So what they do is they say, okay, I'm going to buy this one, and this one, and this one, and this one, and this one. We're going to buy all those. We're going to invest in this one, this one, and this one. And we're hiring somebody to pick and choose, and they pick the ones that we use. Now, the reason that mutual funds don't do as well as an index is because of the fees. So for every 100 of dollars or pesos that you have invested, there are some fees that you're going to pay, and you're probably not going to see it unless you look into the really small print, but it could be anywhere from 1 to 2% of that money under management. So for every $100 you have in there, they're going to take $2, they're going to take $1 to $2 as their fee. Now, if you only do a 6% rate of return and they take 2% of it, your net is only 4%. That's why most mutual funds do not beat the S&P 500. Okay. Now let's talk about number 3, which is the S&P 500. Now the S&P 500 is what we call an index. And what it does is it doesn't pick and choose. It just says, who are the 500 biggest companies out there? Who's the biggest 500? We're just going to invest in the 500 biggest. We're not going to pick and choose. As a result, there's no guessing, there's no picking. There's just saying, we're just going to pick the 500 biggest. And so as a result, for every $100 you got invested, it's probably 0.5% that they're going to charge you to manage that, because they got to manage all that money. So if this stock goes up at 6% like the other one, and you had 0.5%, you're going to net out 5.5%. Okay, so that's why the S&P over time usually outperforms a mutual fund, is because of the fees. And the S&P is saying, hey, you're just going to buy all those. We're not going to pick and choose. We're not going to make anything up. We're just going to say the only criteria is the 500 biggest. Now, you've heard of the NASDAQ. The NASDAQ is the biggest companies that are high tech. And you can invest in the NASDAQ. And when you do that, you say, I want to be able to buy the QQQs. And what that is that is the 100 biggest high-tech companies. That's usually what the NASDAQ is, and that's a different exchange, and you can do that. Okay, and you can do that. You can buy the Dow 30. And what it is that when you do that, they bundle them together for you. So you say, I just want to invest in the Dow 30. And when you do that, then you own a little bit of that. Just like here, when you do the S&P 500, you own a little bit of those. Okay, that's why that's important. Now, the one I like for a lot of people is Berkshire Hathaway, which is, to me, is number 4. And the great thing about Berkshire Hathaway is that it's a stock. It's a stock, just like buying McDonald's or Nike or anything else. But the difference is that it's a big insurance company, And as they get all this extra money in from insurance, they go buy companies with it. And so if you take all these companies that they have, what they've done is that they pick and choose the companies that they want. So there's all these companies that are out there, and they pick and choose the ones that they want, but they also can spend more money and invest more of it. For example, if there's 500 companies in this one, you're going to buy a little bit of that. Berkshire is going to say, we're going to buy a whole bunch of Apple, and we're going to buy 40% of our fund in Apple. So they weight it, they call weighting it, and they put more money into different ones that they really like. And over time, over a long period of time, these two have done the best over time, which has outperformed that one, which outperforms pick and choose, because most people are not good at picking and choosing. Okay, and we don't recommend you do pick and choose. If you're smarter than Warren Buffett, then you can do that. And if you have a lot of money to do that, then you're basically a mutual fund. All right, so that's that big piece right there. So that's basically the picking and choosing that we just talked about. All right, now let's go back and talk about some of the other items that we have. So that's how an index works. Now what I want to do is talk to you about, how do you value a company? How does Warren Buffett value a company? So let's go ahead and erase this part right here. And this is where picking and choosing, and a lot of people get into trouble, is that Buffett looks at a company and he wants to know what the whole company is worth. What is it worth? Now, if he owned a farm, he'd say, I have a farm, this is how much it costs, and this is how much it produces. I'm going to show you real estate, because I'm going to show you an example. How do you find the value of an investment? Well, if it's real estate, we're going to take the rent minus the cost, the expenses, equals the net profit. Okay, so if this was real estate, you're going to take the rent minus the expenses, the property tax, the maintenance, everything, to get a net profit or net operating income. Then what they do is they say, okay, if rent was 200 and our expenses were 100, our net profit is 100. And then they say, how much money would you have to have in the bank at a certain rate of return to make $100? Okay, so they're going to come back in here and they're say, if we had 500 of this and it was making a 20% return, which is kind of high, I'm going to use a bigger number. The value is, they're saying, if we had $1,000 in there and it was making a 10% rate of return, that equals 100. So what's the value of that piece of real estate? Well, it's bringing in 200 in rent. It's got 100 in expenses. The net profit's 100. And then we say, what's the value? Well, if I had 1,000 in the bank and I got a 10% rate of return, that made that same $100. Okay, and that's how they determine the value, is this number right here. This is basically called a multiplier. Now, what's crazy is that as they get a lot more people chasing the investments, they're going to say, okay, well, we only need 5%. You know, if I put money in the bank, I'm okay with just getting a 5% rate of return. Okay, so we have to have 2,000 in there to get that same 100. And what happens is the value changes depending on how much in rental income and net profit it's making. Okay, does that make sense? So you bring rent minus expenses equals the net, and then they say, well, what's the value? Well, the value is a multiplier that says, well, if we had $1,000 in and we bought it for $1,000 and it made 10% net profit, it's going to make that same 100. And the way that they're determining that is saying, we're willing to get a 10% rate of return. Some people are saying, hey, we're willing to get a 5% rate of return. Okay, that means that I'm willing to pay $2,000 for that property. Now add a bunch of zeros, 200,000, 2 million, whatever it is, you're just adding zeros to it. That's how they determine the value. Now, if a whole bunch of people are trying to buy that property, they're going to say, hey, I'm willing to take 4% or 3%, to get me there, or 2.5% or 1%, whatever it is. And as there's all this money chasing after this deal, then that's how the price goes up. Okay. Now, right here, all these people are saying, we're willing to take a 5% rate of return. So the value of that product is 2,000. But in bad times, when people are leaving that marketplace, then they're coming back and say, hey, the real value is only 1,000 because we need a higher rate of return. So that's how you determine the value of real estate. The way you determine value of the stock is the same thing. Here's the income, here's the sales. Then we're going to use the exact same number minus the expenses. That equals 100. That's the net profit. Okay, is that same 100. What is that company worth? What is that business worth? Okay, well, if we need to get a 10 times earnings, if we want to, so that's what they call it, it's earnings per share, but they're basically saying if it's a 10, it will pay for itself in 10 years. If it's making $100 every year, or 100,000 or 100 million, it doesn't matter, and we want to be able to do that over a 10-year period, we're willing to spend $1,000. Because now, if I invested in that company and it pays me a dividend, it makes 100 of these every year, and I want it to pay for itself in 10 years, then I'm willing to pay $1,000 for that stock, for that company. I'm willing to pay $1,000 for that company. If you're over here saying, hey, we need a 5% return, or we need this to be able to pay for itself in 20 years. So 20 years, 20 times 5 equals 100%. So we're saying, we need to make up our price. We're saying the price would be 2,000. Oops, that's 100. So that's how they figure the value. Now, some companies are growth. They're just going like crazy and people don't even care if it's making a profit. If it's a value company, they're saying, hey, this company is making a profit. When Buffett got started, they bought See's Candy. See's Candy was making $5 million a year. That was their profit. And they bought it for $25 million. So that means that it took them 5 years. It took them 5 years to take the net profit that the company was making and be able to pay for the investment. Okay, because they bought it for 25 million, but it was making $5 million a year. So they paid for it in 5 years. That's the same thing we're talking about here. Is basically how many years it will be. If it's getting a 5% return, that means it's 20 years. And that's how they value the stock. And what Buffett does is he comes in and says, what's the total value of this company? What's the total value of this company? And if the total value is low for what it's making, for the cash flow that it's making, then he'll buy a bunch of it. If it's really high, he probably won't. They've stayed away from Tesla because Tesla has really rocketed up. It has very low profit. Amazon had very, very low profit, but it was acquiring customers and a lot of people got excited about buying it. And so they jumped in and all bought it. Okay. So that's basically how you value a stock. Now, most people are not very good at this. I'm not very good at it. And most people shouldn't be doing it. Most people should be doing automatically investing and then putting it into the S&P 500, which is an index. It's 500 of the biggest companies, or putting it into something like Berkshire Hathaway, which are just some of the things that we do at the foundation. I'm not telling you what to do. You do whatever's appropriate for you. It doesn't, but that's how it kind of works. All right. Thanks for being on with us. We're going to come back and we're going to give away some money. So be right back for our next section. Thanks for watching.